If you were an alien from outer space and you didn't know any better and you showed up at the UN COP26 Global Warming Summit in Glasgow this month, you would be forgiven for thinking that Joe Biden and Barack Hussein Obama were actually members of the Communist Party of China. They are literally selling out their country to benefit the mass murdering dictatorship in China, and it all proves that their supposed concern about global warming and carbon dioxide is a fraud. Stay tuned and I'll tell you more. So there's a lot of news out of the COP26. This year, unusually, we did not go. We did not send a team from the New American there, but we have talked to people who were there. And we've seen what came out in the news, which is the usual propaganda. I mean, you can almost write these garbage articles that they write before the summits even start. There's like a formula. You quote some dumb politician explaining, "Oh, we've got to save the planet." Then you quote some negotiator. "Well, these are the great negotiations." Then you quote some climate activist being paid by those same governments. "Oh my goodness, it's not enough to save the planet. They need to do more." And then the politician looks like he's the responsible one holding the line in the face of these wackadoodles that are outside funding, being funded by the government and protesting. So the same thing happens every year. The really big news out of this one, the COP26, is that after many years of the U.S. not really participating in this fraud, Trump sent a team to go have a sideshow at one of these UN summits, the one in Poland. We were there, praising hydrocarbon energy and talking about how great it was. So that was fun. But now the U.S. government is back. And the big news is that the U.S. government has agreed to continue taking a wrecking ball to the U.S. economy, continue destroying our manufacturing, continue to send our energy prices through the stratosphere, and make us even more dependent on the most murderous dictatorship in all of human history. I refer, of course, to the regime in Beijing enslaving the people of China. This so-called agreement that they came up with, it is going to massively boost the economy and the power and the prestige of the Communist Chinese government, even as Western economies commit suicide. And it's quite ironic. Okay, I want you guys to think about this for a minute. Communist China emits more CO2 than the United States, the European Union, and India combined. Okay, and under this idiotic proposal that they're coming up with, and idiotic if you think these people are stupid, they're not. They know exactly what they're doing. We're going to shut down industry in America. We're going to shut down industry in Europe. We're going to rebuild those factories over in China, where the output of CO2 per unit of economic output is massively higher, and somehow that's going to save the climate from CO2. If you believe that, dear viewer, we have just a couple of simple words you can use to describe that. Moron comes to mind, idiot. And I mean, I hate to be harsh, guys, but how could you possibly believe that, right? If these people genuinely believed that CO2 was bad for the planet, that CO2 was bad for the climate, and it's not, the Earth is starving for CO2. More CO2 will be a wonderful thing. But if you believe that CO2 is pollution, explain to me in what universe it makes sense to shut down energy and industry in America, where CO2 emissions are incredibly low per unit of economic output relative to China, and then transfer all that industry and all that production over to China, where more CO2 will be released per unit of output. Explain in what world that makes sense. Of course, it doesn't make sense in any world unless you put it together with the other big news that conveniently was held by the New York Times until after the COP26. Turns out that Joe Biden's crackhead son, Hunter Biden is his name. Don't forget the laptop and the sex videos and the smoking crack videos and making deals with the Communist Chinese, making deals with the Ukrainians, having the big guy, Joe Biden, weaponize foreign aid to fire the prosecutor that was investigating the fraudulent company that Hunter Biden was serving on the board for $50,000 a month. Forget all that. So Hunter Biden, and this is directly from the New York Times, folks, was involved. In fact, he played a key role in handing to Communist China one of the biggest cobalt mines in the world. Okay, cobalt is an essential mineral. It's an essential input for the production of all these green technologies, all these dumb green schemes that we're going to be addicted to now as we shut down hydrocarbon energy. I wonder how much the big guy got. And for those of you who weren't paying attention, the big guy is Joe Biden, right? The big guy was getting a cut of Hunter Biden's corrupt deals. He was the big guy because, of course, he was a senior politician, and he was getting a cut from all this. Folks, this is not just regular old corruption, right? Stealing money from the American people, that's one thing. It's bad enough. Stealing the money from the American people to sell out your country to China, That's a whole nother ball game. And we have a T word that goes along with betraying your country to its enemies. I think we need to explore that further in an upcoming episode. But all of this really was a perfect backdrop for the entire climate clown show that is the UN. Right? The Western governments agreed to hand over trillions of dollars, dramatically slash their economies, redistribute the wealth of their citizens, especially the poor and the middle class, to the elites of the third world, and of course the global elites. And in exchange, those third world kleptocrats agreed to keep their people in poverty in perpetuity. Communist China agreed they're going to keep building more coal-fired power plants at least until 2030. And anybody who believes Communist China is going to stop in 2030 because they said so in 2021 is a fool, a moron, an idiot. Pick your term. You can trust communists to be communists, and that's about it, right, as the old cliche goes. Now, this summit, the big buzzword was net zero, and net zero means we're going to get emissions down to a net of zero. In other words, if we do release any CO2 in the atmosphere, it's got to be compensated for. Al Gore is going to have to go and remove an African village so they can plant trees there and then sell the carbon credits to idiots in the Western world who feel bad about their carbon sins. But this was the big goal. But really, net zero, folks, it needs to be understood for what it is. It is a cover word. It's a code term for centralizing economic power, centralizing political power in the hands of the global elites. And that's what they agreed to do. They drastically upped the numbers for their wealth redistribution programs. They agreed to a phase down of hydrocarbon energy, especially coal, except China. China doesn't have to do that. And this was an absolute bonanza for the global elites. Everybody now calls it a climate crisis. Just a few years ago, it was just climate change. Now the word has gotten out. It's now climate crisis or climate breakdown, right? You got to keep the dummies in fear. Be constantly afraid. Be afraid, folks. Only the elites can save you, right? It was a totally pathetic spectacle. You should have seen. They had so many private jets lined up at the airport to save the world from carbon dioxide. Yeah, that's how seriously they take this, guys. They have to get on their private jet that spews unicorn flatulence when it flies these global elites from all over the world to their exotic destinations. They literally had to start using alternate airports because there was so many private jets, hundreds and hundreds, bringing in the big business moguls. The head of Amazon was there, right? Jeff Bezos, the fascist totalitarian that owns the Washington Compost, one of the most terrible newspapers in the world. It really, guys, it was like a doomsday cult. Okay. Now, it's not that the preachers of this doomsday garbage actually believe it, but to listen to them, you'd think you had ended up like in Guyana, right? Jim's Jonestown, the Marxist mass murder cult. What's his name? UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He used to ridicule people who were promoting this. He said they were peddling a primitive fear without foundation. But at this UN summit, said it's 1 minute to midnight on the doomsday clock, and we need to act now.
It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now.
They're not kidding, folks. That's what they're saying. The head of the UN, Antonio Guterres, an actual socialist, used to be the head of the Socialist International, he said that we are digging our own graves by using so-called fossil fuel energy, hydrocarbon energy. He says we face a stark choice. Either we stop it or it stops us. Dun, dun, dun. You can just hear the creepy music in the background, right? The climate gods must be appeased. Quick, sacrifice more children, sacrifice more prosperity, throw more of your wealth on the dumpster fire that is the United Nations. That will appease the climate gods if you're insane, okay? Guys, I'm not kidding. This is unbelievable. Now, to hear the global elites say it, they actually saved the world. Right? Every year they get together and they say, this is the last chance to save the world. It's the last chance. Every year is the last chance to save the world. And I guarantee you next year will be, again, the last chance to save the world. But somebody, Dr. David Wojcik, PhD, he writes for CFAC, the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. It's a pro-free market environmentalist group. We've had the head of that organization on this program before, actually on Conversations That Matter, Craig Rucker. And Dr. David Wojcik, he wrote that he did an analysis of all the things that these governments pledged, and if they actually follow through with their pledges, and if you believe the UN's hocus-pocus witchcraft climate models, they've saved the world, because they agreed they were going to keep global warming below 2 degrees, and according to all their predictions and their silly climate models, by agreeing to all these things, they are now going to keep global warming to 1.8 degrees of increase. Okay. Totally, totally absurd. But hey, they've saved the world. So what are we going to do now? I don't know. Okay. Now, the kleptocrats ruling Africa, they showed up and they said, we demand $1.3 trillion. That's how the Marxists do. Just like we explained a few weeks ago with the Build Back Better bill, right? They demand 3.5 trillion. They make some outrageous, totally ridiculous demand that they know they're not going to get. Then they say, oh, okay, we'll compromise. We'll just take 1.75 trillion instead. And presto, they're now 1.75 trillion ahead of where they were. So that's what these African kleptocrats did. They showed up and they said, hey, we demand $1.3 trillion because you evil Americans, you guys started burning CO2 before we did. And so give us money, right? Never mind all the innovations, never mind the airplanes that brought them there, never mind the medicines that were developed by Americans, never mind the Industrial Revolution, the energy systems, the light bulbs, all the things that came out of America. We need to give them all money because we burned the gas of life. Oh my God, yes, that's what they said, guys. But so these kleptocrats, they declared that they needed $1.3 trillion, the reparations due to them from Europe and the United States. And supposedly this is somehow going to save Mother Earth. Yeah, they didn't quite explain how that will work, but somehow it's going to save Mother Earth. The clowns agreed, not quite that much, right? 1.3 trillion was out of the question, but they did agree to double the amount of slush fund money in the Green Climate Fund, which of course is controlled by dictatorships. This is basically a constant wealth redistribution mechanism whereby money will be fleeced, robbed, stolen, looted, plundered, however you want to say it, from middle class and poor Americans, Europeans, Canadians, Japanese, and it will be funneled to the kleptocrats enslaving the third world as long as they continue playing along with this gigantic fraud. Joe Biden agreed that he would double the U.S. contribution to this. He didn't ask Congress, no idea whether Congress is actually going to sign the checks, but he agreed to double. He said we're going to send $12 billion annually to start with, very similar to what Obama did. But we also had a side deal between Biden and Obama. They agreed, Biden and the Chinese, the Communist Chinese, they agreed that they're going to work together for enhanced climate actions and they're going to raise ambition, they said. And boy, they were just having this big love fest there. The mass murdering Communist Chinese top climate dictator diplomat, Xi Zhenhua, he said there is more agreement between China and the U.S. than divergence. Isn't that cute? And then John Kerry, the climate envoy representing Joe Biden, the guy who literally flew to Iceland on a private jet to pick up his climate award, literally emitted more CO2 than an entire African village in a year in one flight to go pick up his climate hero award. True story. But then they asked him about it. He's like, well, you know, people like me, I mean, we kind of have to, right? Yeah. Right. People like him. Yep. So he said that, oh, yes, on climate, cooperation is the only way to get this job done. Yes, indeed. As I mentioned, Communist China emits more carbon dioxide than the U.S., the European Union, and India combined. And yet, under this silly agreement that they came up with, which is just building on the Paris Agreement, Communist China will continue building more coal-fired power plants. They will continue expanding their CO2 emissions while Biden takes a wrecking ball to our economy. Obviously, this is going to cause more CO2 in the atmosphere. So if you really believe CO2 is a toxic pollution, you ought to be pretty mad at Joe Biden right now and the Communist Chinese. But of course, you're not allowed to say that, right? You're supposed to be mad at Trump and fossil fuel companies, right? Those evil energy companies that allow you to put gasoline in your car. Those evil energy companies that allow you to cook your dinner and heat your home in the winter. Yeah, those evil, terrible companies. And as I mentioned, the New York Times had a really interesting revelation. Looks like the Biden crime family is getting rich off of this. Now, I don't think that Biden is the top of the deep state, nor are the Communist Chinese. These are bit players. But yes, they get to be enriched during this whole farce. Okay. Pretty incredible, guys. Pretty incredible. We did find out that the CO2 footprint, the carbon footprint of this summit was twice as large as the last summit in Madrid. We were there in Madrid at that last one. And according to this preliminary report, the UN anti-CO2 conference released more than 100,000 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's great. More plant food, that'll make our crops greener. That'll be nice. But hey, if these people really believe that CO2 is so bad, why are they doing this? Right? Why are they doing this? Okay, the climate superheroes flying in on their private jets to eat fancy food and then save the world and then fly home in private jets. to their luxury homes around the world. Yes, Al Gore has a carbon footprint the size of a small town, and yet they continue, right? The whole thing continues. Okay. And even the hypocrisy is not even the worst part of it, guys, right? The hypocrisy is not even the worst part. The worst part is that these clowns are talking about destroying human prosperity, taking a wrecking ball to our individual freedoms and the sovereignty of our nations under the guise of saving us from the gas of life. They need to be stopped. And obviously, Biden is not going to be doing that. So we need Congress to stand in the way. We need state governments to stand in the way. We need local governments to stand in the way. We have got to put a stop to this. And if we don't, it's going to put a stop to our freedoms and our prosperity. So, folks, get involved. Get yourself up to speed on this. In recent weeks, we did an episode on all of the failed so-called climate predictions. So you can go back and learn about 50 years worth of fraudulent climate predictions, all of which turned out to be wrong. And then you could say, are they really right this time? Get the information to your legislators, get it to your governor, get it to your congressman, get it to your county commissioners, and make sure that they stand in the way, that they stand in the gap. We must not play along with this fraud. We must not send our industry to communist China so that they can come back later and sell us cheap garbage junk on credit to tighten the noose on us, folks. It's an abomination. It's a disgrace. It needs to stop. I'm Alex Newman. This is Behind the Deep State. Thank you for watching, and until next week, God bless you all.
If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe, hit like, hit that little bell so that you'll be notified whenever we post new videos. And also, please make sure to share this video with your friends. Email is a great way to do it. Remember, there are powerful forces working to steal our freedom and destroy our country. We need to work together, expose those behind the deep state. Otherwise, you can kiss your liberties goodbye.